I've come to the revelation that there are only two things that I can expect from my user experience on Twitter: pain and great fan art. One innocent afternoon, I happened across this revolutionary piece from Cloudmancy, so the single neuron bouncing around in my head like the DVD video logo immediately decided, yes. Now, before we address my highly scientific theory about his McDonald's order, we need to tackle the base, and for this, I actually did some extensive research on McDonald play places. I assumed that to be the most likely place for Fuecoco to eat, the floor of the play place. Definitely not a chair, and a booth didn't really feel right either. Ultimately, I settled on a tile floor, though I didn't know what color I had painted yet, since they're all different in every franchise. I carefully brought out some acetone. Hopefully this cutting mat won't suffer the same fate as the last one. And with that out, I began smoothing the grout lines between the tile. I'm also making a smaller tile floor as a tester for when I make the grout and choose the paint. This way I can avoid redoing stuff on the main floor and save myself some hassle that I know I'll create for myself. And with that, the tester and the base are pretty much done for now. As you can see, despite how I struggle, it never gets as smooth as I want it to be, so I'll be sanding it off camera in a little bit. Now we can move on to sculpting our Tubby Jalapeno Dinosaur, and we're done. Video over. See you next week. Did I scare you there? I'm getting harder and harder to predict. Just wait, by the time I get to my 20th video, I'll pull a Cicada 3301 and make you guys scavenge the internet for each piece of the sculpture. Okay, back to the sculpture. Sorry, I distract easily. To make Fuecoco, you're firstly gonna sculpt Blipbug. Yep, I did not misspeak. That's a real Pokemon. Once I had that basic shape down, I can then add clay and define his back and mouth. You'll also see in the next shot that I cut out some clay from inside him and stuffed it with foil. This is just so that the clay isn't super thick and can actually bake evenly when I put it in the oven. After whittling down his shape a little bit more, I press down on a ball of clay and shape it into his tongue. Fuecoco has a pretty simple design. I'd say the most complicated part about him is his mouth because he has a whopping 3 teeth. We'll add those later. For now, let's dive into this exclusive Fuecoco foot content, which you can only find on Crossing Crafts. So hit that subscribe button and like the video now to gain exclusive access to his Poke fans. Don't pause to read all that. Next up are his eyes, and I wanted to indent them with the back of this paintbrush, but I didn't really like it very much, so I smoothed it over, and the next try was somehow worse, so I eventually just took it off camera to do it. Once they were semi-acceptable, I added his nostrils, which are just triangular indents on the tip of his snout. Once those were pressed in, I could add the lines that will separate his belly and undertail from the rest of his body. I baked him to help save my progress and gave him a really good sand. He looks a lot cleaner now and ready to get a pedicure. With all toenails present, it's time for my favorite part, slapping some craft singles on this bad boy. I'm not even making this up. I went down a long rabbit hole of lore and memes in the Pokemon community that alleges developers are just slapping craft singles onto Pokemon. But if anyone asks, you didn't hear it from me. Anyway, this part was super simple. All I needed were 2 squares, one for his chest and the other for his tail. Next up were his arms, and just like the rest of his body, these were quite simple. All I did was roll up 2 things of clay, blend them into the body, and then add 3 little cones of clay, acting as the fingers on the tip of each arm. Once his arms are on, I'm going to cut out some triangles that I'll pre-bake and then sand down a bit to use as his teeth. I'm cutting out more than necessary just in case, but we'll only use 3 in the end. With a perfect set of veneers installed, we can put away our spicy Chublore dragon and begin working on the McDonald accessories. Before I promise to give my scientific theory on what he orders, so buckle up because here it is. Hello and welcome to the science behind Fuecoco's McDonald's order, over an hour of research presented in under 1 minute and 38 seconds. The first thing we need to address is where our crocodile Pepper comes from. He hails from Spain, and wouldn't you know it, McDonald's is a leading influence in not only the Spanish fast food market, but the greater European market as a whole. This led me to ask what the most popular items are from McDonald's, and what I found was this. Chicken nuggets were number 1, french fries were number 2, and coffee was number 3. This information begs the question, would Fuecoco order any of these? I went through one by one scouring the scientific text until I came up with these 3 answers. In regards to the nuggets, he would not order them due to his lack of teeth and preference for higher quality chicken. He would absolutely order the french fries due to their uniquely perfect crispy to soft ratio, which McDonald's has perfected over the last 67 years that also makes it easy to consume. He would not order coffee due to his constantly hot body temperature that comes from being a fire type. We've looked at the where and the what, and now we must dissect the who. Who is Fuecoco? According to Bulbapedia, he has a body like an apple, and wouldn't you know it, potatoes are often referred to as the apple of the earth. This means it is canon that he would order french fries. We all know he's a fire type, but this does not equate to him liking spicy things, so cross all spicy items off the list. Lastly, Fuecoco is often compared to a pepper, and what beverage does McDonald's carry that contains the exact same word in it? That's right, Dr. Pepper. My final findings are absolute and as follows. Fuecoco would not order chicken burgers or coffee, but would instead order a simple Dr. Pepper and fries due to the refreshing coolness paired with the crispy fries that still remain unrivaled by other chains. That was not necessary and not a single person asked. But comment down below if you agree with my findings, just so you know if you disagree, you're wrong. Okay, back to the craft. For the accessories, I dissected the anatomy of the paper bag and laid them flat to bake individually. I did this because otherwise the clay would bend and look a bit wonky as I tried to assemble it, and I wanted a nice crisp paper bag. I'm also cutting out pieces for the fry carton. For now I'll only be baking the back piece and the bottom piece. Before we bake it, I'm going to do one last thing and add a few tiny details. I'm going to add some fold lines on the front and back panels, and I'm going to add the serrated edges that you usually find on the top of paper bags. Once those pieces are done baking, I can retrofit a front panel for the fry carton and bake it one more time. By the time I finish that and place it in the oven, the pieces of the bag are done cooling, so we can begin to assemble them. This was quite easy. It's basically just a rectangle with some concave sides, and I attached them all using some extra clay paired with bacon bond. Next up is the paper cup for our Dr. Pepper. I just need a long rectangular sheet of clay, and I'll be connecting the 2 ends. I'm not going to make the seam completely disappear just because you can usually see them on paper cups, but this one in particular obviously needs a bit of sanding, which I'll do after I add the rim. I'm going to bake it and give it a good sand so we can move on to my favorite part of this whole build, which was making the fries. Realistic polymer clay food was basically my gateway into polymer clay. I've never made it before, but it was so popular that it was how I discovered polymer clay even existed. I don't want my first time to be a letdown, so I did get a new tool that I'll bring out in a second, but before that, let's make the fries. The shape of the fries was simple enough. I just rolled it out into an even layer and used a straight razor to cut long strips. I measured the strips so they'd be a realistic length inside the carton and began adding overlapping layers of them. One of my original ideas when I thought of this build was to keep it more realistic, so I was gonna make the carton of fries half full like McDonald's is often guilty of doing, but I just had so much fun making them that I went a little overboard and abandoned ship on that idea. After making the main carton of fries and some extra fries for inside the bag, I'm bringing out my secret weapon for these, oil pastels. Oil pastels are basically pigmented chalk/wax sticks. You can shave them for a very satisfying shot or to create a really good dry pigment, which you can then apply on non-baked polymer clay to act as shading. So in this case, we want to recreate that golden brown crust, so I'm mixing up an orangey yellow to use first. I apply the pigment with a dry paintbrush on unbaked clay wherever I see fit, and it'll bond to the polymer clay as I press it in. Now, French fries are not always cooked evenly, especially in a fast food place, and many of them have darker, almost burnt parts, so I'm sparingly using a deep reddish brown to add a darker crust to certain areas. McDonald's fries would not be McDonald's fries without a disturbing amount of salt coating them. I really wasn't sure how to recreate the salt at first, but then my brain was just like,
俺の特殊能力はじゃんけんに勝てる能力ってか。お前バカか。こんなもんでどうやってモンスターと渡り合いってんだ。
And I was like, oh yeah, that is an option. Once my brain got over that barrier, I gave each individual fry a light coat of Mod Podge and rolled them around in the salt for a nice even coating. I gave a coat over the fries that would go in the carton, and because it was hard to roll, I just chose to salt bathe the details on. Every drink needs a straw, and this one was quite easy to make. I chose to make it a bendy straw instead of the classic straight straw McDonald's offers, because it seemed more accurate to Fuecoco. Alright, all of the puzzle pieces are present, and this is about where I want them to go. I'll add most of the loose fries to the bottom of the bag, but some will be on the floor as well, and overall I think it's looking pretty good. The next step is obviously to color everything, and we're gonna start with the floor. I gave it a really good sand, and here it was before, so you can see what a difference it made. And while I was sanding, I had to think what I was gonna paint it like. Do you remember when I said that I did a lot of research on McDonald play places? Yeah, well, I had the startling revelation that all McDonald floors are absolutely disgusting and abysmal looking, so I decided to do something more aesthetic like this. With the color palette all picked out, I mixed up my colors and gave it a try on our test floor to see if I liked it. And I felt like the colors were a bit too dark, so I added more white to all of them and gave them another coat, and boom, something beautiful was born. The paint is all figured out now, so I'm going to test out 3 different Mod Podge top coats: matte, semi-gloss, and gloss. I liked the matte option the best, so I gave another coat of it over everything and began to make my own texture paste. It's my first time ever making a texture paste. All it is a mixture of baking soda and Mod Podge until you get to the grocery store icing consistency. And it worked perfectly, so let's do the same exact process just on the main floor. And with all the excitement of the texture paste, I completely forgot to put a top coat over the paint, so some of it wiped off, but it was only noticeable on the corners, which was an easy fix. Now it's time to choose a packaging design. You see, my first instinct was to go to the McDonald's corporate website to see, the historical list of all the packaging designs they've had before, like an accumulation of pictures that showed an aspect of the company's history through their long reign, and they didn't have that. All they had was 2 sad and short articles about some new antiseptic looking design and how they've become more environmentally friendly or something. So I chose to look elsewhere, and I found this wonderful list which gave me a chronological order of iconic packaging from McDonald's, and scrolling through, there were some tempting options for sure. I even considered Minions packaging just for the memes. But eventually I settled upon the 1995 through 2003 McDonald's packaging. Of course it was the best because in that time frame was the year I was born. So all of my research is finally done and we can now focus solely on the execution. First up is the fry carton, and I'm giving it the classic white and yellow stripes on the inside with the help of some thin strips of painter's tape. You actually won't see this at all because I got too excited about the fries and I packed the carton so full it completely blocked the design. But that's fine, we'll just move on to the design for the front, and I gave the carton a bright red and did the designs under the McDonald's logo first, before moving on to the McDonald's logo itself. For all of the McDonald's logos I'll need, I just used some painter's tape on my monitor to trace out a few different sizes, and then I cut them out with an X-Acto knife so I could paint over them. Next up is the soda cup, and I gave it a few coats of white so that I had a good base to work on, and after that I could follow the design in layers. Firstly, I taped off the section for the yellow, painted it, and gave it a top coat, and then taped off the section for the red, painted that as well, and also gave it a top coat. After I painted the logo and gave it some touch-ups, the soda cup was lacking, well, the soda. I made a line of just the clear UV resin, cured it, and cut it into small sections which would act as my ice cubes in a little bit. Now, with all of our pieces ready, it was time to make the Dr. Pepper, or as my brother likes to call it, barbecue water. For the soda, I'm mixing up some brown and red paint into the UV resin, and I'm doing 2 pours so that the light can cure it all the way through. before I fully cure the top layer, I sprinkle on my ice cubes and I do one last thin layer of clear resin. For the paper bag, I started with several coats of a natural brown, and luckily for me, the same design that was used on the cup was also used on the paper bag, so that made things a lot easier. The only difference in design was super tiny. It was just one red square in the top right of the bag with another tiny McDonald's logo. I added some touch-ups and then I did the big logo and freehanded the tiny logo. It looked good, just from far away. No, farther. Oh yeah, that's great. To remain truly authentic in spirit, I wanted to make the bag nice and greasy, so I whipped up a slightly darker brown and added in all the spots I felt necessary. After I did this, I went back in with some water and just kind of rubbed it around in a circle for each grease spot. And the last thing we need to paint is Fuecoco, which is super simple considering he's like 5 colors. First thing that's getting slathered with that sweet acrylic is his red body, then the inside of his mouth gets a dark pink, his face and belly get bone white, and last but not least, we cannot forget to paint the craft singles. Oh, and also the things on the top of his head get painted yellow. According to Bulbapedia, these are fire energy? I have no clue. Anyway, moving on to his eyes, we have a dark to light gray ombre behind a white pupil, and I foolishly believed that adding UV resin would enhance the sculpture. However, I was quickly put back in my place when it didn't look good at all. According to my diagnosis, I didn't give the paint enough time to dry, so it bled into the resin, but that's fine. I just dug out the resin and repainted that one eye. We have finally finished, so please sit back and enjoy the final shots of one of the only good things that has ever come from Twitter. Holy guacamole, I did not think this video would be so long. Thank you all for watching to the very end. It's been far too long since I last posted. Some stuff went awry, but that won't happen again. My next video will be beautifully cringe, and you will see it in about a week or so don't act too sus and gather some crewmates to watch with you. See you next time.